Darius Knight sat alone in the quiet classroom with a burning ambition that clashed violently against the world's cruelty. His essay titled, "Why Harvard Needs Me," boldly declared his dreams, even though outside his small apartment, his mother worked long, grueling hours mopping hospital floors. Yet inside that room, his hope was met with vicious disdain. Mrs. Holloway, a teacher with a biting tongue, sneered at his words and openly ridiculed him in front of the other students, urging him to know his place. Marcus and Leon, wealthy and callous, joined her mockery, their laughter fueled by racial prejudice that stung like a slap. Darius maintained a quiet dignity, his eyes burning with silent fury as he gathered his papers. After that fateful day, the humiliation pushed him to plan an outrageously magnificent retribution. When a Harvard dean later sought him out by name, it was not just recognition but the spark for a dramatic counterattack against his oppressors. Darius transformed his pain into a blazing determination to prove them wrong. He meticulously prepared a comeback that would shatter their arrogance, and when his moment of revenge finally arrived at an academic gathering, the cruelty of his enemies was laid bare, leaving them stunned and the audience completely in awe. Darius Knight sat at his rickety kitchen table that evening, with papers scattered about, as he revised his essay, determined not to let anyone steal his thunder. The apartment was quiet except for an incessant drip from the leaky bathroom faucet and distant sirens echoing down the block. His devoted mother, Evelyn Knight, wrapped her late grandmother's treasured gold bracelet in a soft cloth, feeling every pang of sacrifice as she prepared to pawn it for a reliable second-hand laptop. The next day, while Darius attended school, Evelyn visited 3 different pawn shops until one finally offered a fair price. That evening she handed him the laptop, a machine with a working battery and just enough memory to manage his assignments, including his daring Harvard application. Determined beyond measure, Darius rose before dawn and burned the midnight oil, pouring every ounce of his resolve into perfecting his essay. Meanwhile, in a stark display of envy and racial contempt, Marcus and Leon, 2 privileged boys with hardened hearts, watched his every move. They snuck a copy of his carefully crafted essay left behind at the printer and surreptitiously saved sections into a folder labeled Darius's Sources on the school's shared drive. The very next day, in the cold and impersonal office of Principal Grant, Darius was dragged into a meeting where Mrs. Holloway, with a venomous sneer, accused him of plagiarism by comparing his words to published works. The evidence, though dubious, stung him deeply. Only the unexpected, steadfast defense from longtime janitor Mr. Whitmore shattered the damning narrative. Later that day, Evelyn confronted Mrs. Holloway with quiet fury, defending her son's unyielding integrity and vowing that one day Darius Knight would unleash a retribution so magnificent and just that even his detractors would be left in awe. Darius Knight could feel the bitterness of injustice and the sting of betrayal as he stepped off the school bus that chilly winter afternoon. His heart pounded under the weight of all that had happened, and though his soul burned with determination, a part of him trembled at the cruelty of those who wanted to see him fail. That day in the crowded hallway, his friend Jade, eyes filled with reluctant compassion and fear, had whispered that someone had set him up. Her voice, soft yet heavy with sorrow, confirmed what Darius already felt deep inside. The realization that Marcus and Leon, driven by envy and racial prejudice, had stolen a precious piece of his academic future, filled him with a mix of indignation and despair. Later that evening, as the urban twilight crept over the school steps, Darius sat alone, waiting for another bus. Mr. Whitmore, the elderly janitor with years of wisdom etched into his worn face, joined him. In a gentle tone, Mr. Whitmore recalled his days in Boston and the awe he felt for places like Harvard, reminding Darius that institutions like those were not merely buildings, but bastions of hope and opportunity. His words, filled with both regret and encouragement, stirred something powerful within Darius. Their conversation turned deeply personal, and as Mr. Whitmore shared confidential treasures, a thick folder labeled with the name Malcolm Rivers, a Harvard alumnus, the janitor revealed that this was precisely what Darius needed to fuel his ambitions and prove his worth against those who had underestimated him. The next morning, with early rays of sun filtering into the quiet library, Darius sat with Mr. Whitmore, absorbing lessons on rhetoric and the subtle art of persuasion from a dog-eared text on logical fallacies and great American speeches. Each lesson deepened Darius's understanding of language as a weapon and a shield, arming him against the cruelty of Mrs. Holloway and her ilk. Yet, even as his mind sharpened, shadows of guilt and hurt lingered. The memory of his probation, a punishment for a plagiarism incident that was as unjust as it was unproven, haunted him with every keystroke as he refined his essay. This was not only about academic integrity. It was about the stark racial discrimination and deep-seated envy that refused to let him rise. Determined, Darius decided to use his newfound knowledge and passion not only to prove his worth in the citywide essay competition, sponsored by the University Alliance Foundation, but also to exact a resounding comeback. Despite the school's policy and the cold words of Mrs. Holloway, who had been quick to use his probation status to discredit him, Principal Grant eventually allowed him to participate, with each early morning study session at the downtown law library, where even security guards gave him wary glances. Darius's plan to counter every slight and injustice took root. His essay was no longer just a piece of paper. It had become his battle cry against years of neglect, racism, and arbitrary cruelty. Every word he wrote was a defiant refusal to be diminished, a promise that the day would come when he would rise above this suffering with a victory so magnificent that even his bitterest critics would have to stand and applaud. Darius Knight had spent endless hours delving into the world of formal argumentation techniques, uncovering resources that no typical high school student would ever find. His mentor, Mr. Whitmore, introduced him to scholarly journals on rhetoric, books on persuasive communication, and even rare archived speeches from historical figures. The world of formal argumentation unfolded before Darius like a treasure trove of possibilities. Meanwhile, Marcus and Leon looked on with barely concealed frustration as Darius's confidence flourished in the face of constant adversity. Their taunts, which once cut like a knife, now bounced off him as he continued to grow stronger in his resolve. In class, even Mrs. Holloway's bitter attempts to undermine him were met with respectful yet firm responses that left her visibly shaken and desperate to regain control. It was during one of these crucial moments of growth that Darius was introduced to new resources that widened his perspective even more. His eyes lit up each time Mr. Whitmore unveiled another lesson on persuasive speech. Darius learned that his writing needed to echo conviction and authenticity, a lesson that resonated deep within him as he prepared for the upcoming essay competition. However, behind the scenes, Marcus and Leon were hatching a new plan. They conspired with Brad, a senior with technical expertise whose loyalty could be bought with concert tickets and promises of social acceptance. Their scheme was devious yet simple. During Darius's presentation, they would replace his carefully printed essay with blank pages. Their calculated plan was intended to embarrass him on a public stage, turning his moment of triumph into an utter humiliation. Darius remained blissfully unaware of these sinister machinations as he continued his practice sessions with Mr. Whitmore. The janitor's words rang in his ears, reminding him that true strength came from within. Darius's focus was on mastering argumentative writing techniques, on refining his speech so that every word resonated with purpose. His growing mastery of rhetoric was both liberating and empowering, transforming him from a timid student into a young man with a voice that refused to be silenced. Yet, as the day of the competition drew near, hints of unease began to creep into the air. On the morning of the competition, held at the Grand Riverside Convention Center in the wealthiest part of the city, Darius walked through its opulent lobby feeling out of place in his simple button-down shirt and khakis. His mother, Evelyn, had sent him a smooth stone as a token of luck that he clutched tightly in his pocket. The moment of truth arrived as Darius stepped onto the stage. His heart pounded, and he confidently placed his essay on the podium. But when he glanced down, he was met with a horrifying sight. The pages were blank. A murmur ran through the audience, while Marcus and Leon exchanged gleeful looks from the third row. For a few agonizing seconds, silence reigned as Darius's mind raced. Then, with a deep breath and unwavering determination, he stepped away from the podium. His voice rang out calmly as he apologized for the technical difficulty, yet his steady tone carried a hidden promise. In that quiet moment, Darius declared that perhaps it was fitting for his words to be created in his heart rather than printed on paper. The blank pages became a symbol of his struggle and his unyielding spirit, a defiant protest against those who sought to keep him down. In that moment, with every eye fixed upon him, Darius Knight stood tall, ready to reclaim his narrative and unleash a comeback so magnificent that it would silence his detractors for good. Darius Knight stood in the spotlight, his pulse pounding in his ears as he realized that fate had taken his prepared script and left him with nothing but the raw strength of his beliefs. Sometimes life takes away your prepared script, and what matters is what you've internalized, what you truly believe rather than what you've memorized. With no written words before him, Darius moved to the center of the stage and declared in a firm, unwavering voice, "Legacy is not inherited, it's created." His voice, steady despite the shock of blank pages, echoed throughout the grand hall of the Riverside Convention Center. Every word he spoke was a testament to the struggles he had endured, struggles marked by racial prejudice, class differences, and the cold, calculated cruelty of those who sought to see him fall. He spoke of his father's deferred Harvard dream, not with bitterness, but with the determined purpose of forging his own path. Darius explained that education was not a birthright, it was a tool, a renewable resource that only increased in value when put to use. As he recounted how society often mistakes accidents of birth for indicators of worth, he fiercely asserted that true legacy comes from the choices we make to transcend our circumstances rather than allowing them to define us. The audience, initially stunned into silence by the sudden power of his words, gradually leaned in closer. Principal Grant himself, who had always maintained a stern, impartial facade, uncrossed his arms and listened intently. Even some of the judges who had been scribbling notes now simply absorbed every syllable. Darius continued, "I stand before you today not because my path was clear or easy, but because it wasn't. Every obstacle forced me to decide, give in to the limitations imposed by others or create my own destiny." His voice gained momentum with each sentence, and soon his passion became contagious. The silence deepened until it broke out in a slow building round of applause. From the wings, Marcus and Leon exchanged confused glances. Their intricate plot to humiliate him had spectacularly backfired. Darius's words resonated with truth and defiance. In one particularly poignant moment, he quoted a line from his father's journal, "The dream is never about the destination, it's about proving you belong there all along," a line that perfectly encapsulated the defiance in his heart. As Darius wrapped up his presentation, the applause grew louder, igniting a spark of vindication within him. He had turned a sabotaged moment into a soaring triumph. After the event, as Darius made his way back through the convention center's opulent lobby, he encountered murmurs and whispered remarks of admiration. In that moment, he felt not just the burden of his struggle but the burning promise of his future. Unbeknownst to him, Dean Malcolm Rivers of Harvard, a distinguished man in a tailored suit with a commanding presence, had been watching his performance with keen interest and was already marking his calendar with a follow-up. Later, the atmosphere at Westwood High shifted dramatically. Rumors of the Harvard dean's unexpected visit swirled through the halls, and even Mrs. Holloway, who had once reveled in Darius's humiliation, now trembled as Principal Grant summoned him to the office. The very air around the school pulsed with the possibility of a new chapter, one where Darius Knight, once oppressed by the cruelty of those who expected him to fail, would rise with a vengeance so grand that it silenced all his detractors. Darius Knight left the classroom with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, his steps echoing in the long corridor as whispers trailed behind him. "Harvard Dean, Principal's office, in trouble again," someone murmured. Confusion and apprehension clouded his features as he made his way toward the administrative wing. Upon reaching the door, the secretary's voice was firm yet neutral. "They're waiting for you." With that, Darius stepped into Principal Grant's office, where the air felt unexpectedly charged. Principal Grant was seated behind his large oak desk, and next to him sat a distinguished older black man, dressed in a suit that spoke of both authority and prestige. "Darius Knight," said Principal Grant warmly, a tone rarely heard from him, "I'd like you to meet Dean Malcolm Rivers from Harvard University." The dean rose, extending his hand, and Darius shook it tentatively as his mind raced. The dean's smile was calm yet knowing, and soon Darius learned that his performance at the McAllister essay competition had not gone unnoticed. Dean Rivers commended him for his remarkable recovery from what was clearly a deliberate act of sabotage. The message was clear. Marcus and Leon's cruel scheme had backfired, and now the world was beginning to see the strength of his character. As the conversation unfolded, Dean Rivers revealed he had read not only the official submission of Darius's essay, but also earlier drafts, some of which had been rescued by Mr. Whitmore himself. The dean's praise was both genuine and transformative. "Your work is authentic, thoughtful, and refreshingly original," he said, his voice steady with conviction. Yet the conversation took a surprising turn when Dean Rivers mentioned Darius's father. "Your father was William Carter, correct?" he inquired, causing Darius's heart to race with confusion. Leon hesitated. He had always believed his father had attended State University, not Harvard. Before Darius could fully process this revelation, Principal Grant interjected to explain that Darius's mother, Evelyn Carter, worked long hours at Mercy General Hospital and had been unavailable to discuss these delicate matters until now. Within minutes, Evelyn arrived, her face a mix of worry and something deeper that Darius couldn't place. The connection between Dean Rivers and Evelyn was immediate and profound. Here were two souls intertwined by a shared past. Evelyn softly acknowledged, "Malcolm, it has been a long time." And the dean confirmed that William Carter had been one of his most promising research assistants during a groundbreaking medical ethics project that had reshaped hospital practices across America. Darius listened, stunned, as the revelation poured over him like a tidal wave. His father, who had long been the quiet hero of his childhood memories, had left behind not only a legacy of determination, but also a scholarship program aimed at talented students from underrepresented communities. Professor Gerald Whitmore, once an associate professor at Harvard, known for his unconventional brilliance, had recognized something in Darius's writing that reminded him of his late father. Dean Rivers made it clear that while Darius's connection to William Carter might lead to more scrutiny, it in no way guaranteed favoritism. "You won't receive special treatment," the dean said firmly, "only a fair chance to prove your worth." As the meeting drew to a close and Dean Rivers handed Darius a crisp business card, Principal Grant's eyes and even Mrs. Holloway's earlier smug expression seemed to falter. In that moment, Darius Knight realized that his journey was taking a dramatic new turn. A turning point where past injustices would soon be met with a resounding triumph that promised to shake the very foundations of those who had once tried to hold him down. Darius Knight left the principal's office with his mother Evelyn by his side, his heart both heavy and buoyed by a newfound sense of purpose. As they stepped into the corridor, Mr. Whitmore, the venerable janitor whose wisdom and once-hidden brilliance had shaped his destiny, waited silently. His soft words reached Darius quietly. "Your father helped me too. Before he was known at Harvard, he was simply a good man." Those words resonated deeply within Darius, reminding him that part of his father's legacy was not merely a title, but the strength of character that lit the path for him. News of Dean Malcolm Rivers' visit had exploded through Westwood High like wildfire. Overnight, the social landscape shifted dramatically. Students who had once dismissed Darius now sought him out, and teachers who barely remembered his contributions praised his insightful observations in class. For Marcus and Leon, the privileged bullies whose sneering remarks once defined the backdrop of his life, this reversal was intolerable. In the sleek interior of Marcus's father's luxury SUV, Marcus fumed bitterly, proclaiming in disgust that Darius was nothing but a charity case and not Harvard material. Leon, scrolling through his phone as if it held all the truths, ridiculed that Darius's achievements were somehow tied to his mother's work, suggesting that her modest hospital job made him unworthy of any real distinction. Their cruel laughter and bitter jabs underscored an ingrained racial prejudice that had long sought to keep someone like Darius firmly in his place. Within days, an anonymous post made its rounds on the school's unofficial social media page. The crudely edited image showed Darius in a Harvard sweatshirt next to a mop bucket, with a caption that read, "Harvard's newest charity case, like mother, like son." It was designed to humiliate him publicly and reinforce the shame his detractors wished to impose. By morning, The entire school buzzed with whispers and stares. Even Jade, his cautious friend whose concern for him ran deep, showed him the image during lunch. "This is low even for them," she said with a grim expression, and the blatant public mockery of his mother cut deeper than he expected. With a heavy heart, Darius left school early, taking the bus home. There, in the quiet sanctuary of their modest kitchen, he found his mother surrounded by the Harvard letter and several old photo albums spread out before her. A face, marked by years of quiet hardship and resilience, softened as she saw the hurt in his eyes. "Darius, why aren't you at school?" she asked, her voice trembling with concern. Unable to hold back, Darius showed her the vicious post on his phone, a flood of conflicting emotions washing over him. The public ridicule, it seemed, was not just an attack on him, but on his mother's dignity as well. Evelyn sighed deeply, inviting him to sit. "It's complicated," she began, trying to steady her voice. "After your father died, I made choices. Some good, some questionable in hindsight. I wanted you to build your own identity, not just chase after a legacy that wasn't meant for us." Her eyes glistened with regret as she recalled how she had hidden the truth, letting him believe that his father was just some regular man with a dream, when in truth he had been part of something far greater. She revealed that William Carter, Darius's father, had been a brilliant self-taught researcher, a pioneer in bioethics who, despite never attending Harvard as a student, had worked there as a research assistant. Dean Rivers, recognizing his extraordinary talent, had created a unique position for him and had even established a scholarship program to support underrepresented talents. "Your father was more than just a dream that never happened," she explained softly. "He was a man whose intellect and passion changed lives. I kept it from you because I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed by pressure or to think you needed fancy connections to succeed." The revelation struck Darius like a thunderclap. All the years of sneers from Marcus and Leon, all the bitterness in his world of high school, suddenly paled in comparison to the powerful legacy of his father, a legacy built not on privilege or wealth, but on sheer determination and brilliance. That night, as the weight of family secrets and public humiliation began to settle, Darius experienced a profound transformation. When he returned to school the next morning, whispers and stares still followed him, but they no longer had the power to wound him. In the hallway, he found Jade waiting with a look of genuine concern. "You disappeared yesterday," she said gently. "I was so worried." Darius managed a small smile, his voice resolute. "I had some family history to sort out, but I'm good now. Actually, I'm better." There was a quiet strength in his words, a clear declaration that he would no longer let the cruelty of others define him. He closed his locker with the determination of someone who had embraced his true identity. "I'm done letting other people define me," he thought, his resolve hardening. Over the following weeks, Darius focused with an intensity that was both inspiring and inevitable. His Harvard application became more than a mere piece of paper. It became a battle cry against every slight, every racist remark, and every institutional bias he had ever faced. Dean Rivers' words echoed in his mind. There would be no favors and no special treatment for him, only a fair chance to prove his merit, despite the ever-watchful eyes of those who doubted his worth. Meanwhile, the fallout from the anonymous post forced Marcus and Leon into a corner. Their smug confidence began to crumble as more students and even some sympathetic teachers started to see Darius in a new light, no longer as an object of ridicule, but as a young man of remarkable resolve and extraordinary ability. In hushed conversations in the cafeteria, groups discussed his insightful contributions during a weekend mentorship program at Brenner Academy, where Darius had been thrust into a world of high privilege and intellectual debate. At Brenner Academy, where well-dressed students spoke confidently about their elite backgrounds, Darius's quiet, thoughtful interjections during discussions on the ethical dimensions of artificial intelligence in healthcare made waves. He challenged the room to consider the impact of advanced technology on custodial and support staff, perspectives that had never before been on the radar of the privileged elite. His words, drawn from both his own life experiences and his mother's story, cast a new light on issues of injustice and inequality. By the end of the day's sessions, even those who had once smirked at his expense acknowledged the depth of his insights. Yet through it all, Darius never lost sight of his father's legacy. The support from Mr. Whitmore, who had taken him under his wing like a surrogate mentor, only intensified his resolve to prove that his worth was not dictated by the color of his skin, nor by the socio-economic obstacles that had plagued his past. In quiet moments between debates and writing workshops, Darius would recall Mr. Whitmore's advice. The true measure of potential isn't how high you can climb when the path is clear, but how you navigate when obstacles deliberately block your way. That mantra became his guiding light as he balanced the harsh realities of discrimination with the ambitious hope that one day institutions like Harvard would change, not by charity, but by sheer undeniable excellence. By the time the final decisions on his Harvard application were due, Darius had transformed. The boy who once silently endured ridicule now stood as a beacon of self-made resilience. The whispers in the hallways had shifted from mocking to respectful. Even teachers who had once been dismissive now sought his insights during class. On the day he submitted his application, Darius looked in the mirror and saw not only his own reflection, but the legacy of his father, a legacy of challenge and triumph carved from adversity. The promise of retribution was not a violent act, but a quiet, unyielding assertion of worth. It was the victory of a young man who had refused to be defined by the cruelty and the entrenched prejudices of his detractors. In that moment, Darius Knight knew that every slight, every whispered insult had fueled the fire that would carry him forward into a future where his achievements would speak louder than any name or status ever could. The road ahead remained steep and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in his life, Darius was prepared to meet them head-on with the full force of his indomitable spirit. Darius Knight looked up to see a familiar face from Brenner Academy. Taylor Roberts, whose name tag made it clear, approached him kindly. "Go ahead," he said with surprise in his voice. Taylor smiled and complimented his smart point on how artificial intelligence affects support staff. "My dad always says a good leader cares about everyone, not just those in the boardroom," she said confidently, adding that her father, a Fortune 500 CEO, believed in fairness. As they talked, Darius realized not everyone in that privileged world was his enemy. Some truly valued diverse perspectives, giving him hope. Yet the weekend had been emotionally exhausting, filled with microaggressions and constant tests of his worth. By Sunday afternoon, although tired, Darius felt empowered. He knew he belonged in the conversation now. Later, during the mentorship program at Brenner, Dean Rivers reminded him that Harvard was not always welcoming. "Some doors will open for you and others you will have to force open," the dean said plainly, adding that his father's journal might help him find the strength he needed. In that moment, Darius clutched the worn, leather-bound journal his mentor had given him. Its handwritten notes urged him on. "Your dreams will scare small minds. Let them be scared." Darius Knight stood before the panel at the Harvard Club, heart pounding as he watched evidence of relentless bullying and sabotage materialize on a tablet. Principal Grant and Dean Malcolm Rivers had gathered security footage, screenshots of a doctored image ridiculing his mother, and incriminating texts orchestrating his essay sabotage. The evidence left no doubt. Marcus Williams and his cronies had waged a systematic, racist campaign to derail his success. When Principal Grant declared the meeting adjourned, he warned Mr. Williams that the district's zero tolerance for bullying applied even to board presidents' children. Mr. Williams' face flushed with fury as he stormed out after Dean Rivers handed him a letter from Harvard's general counsel condemning any interference with candidate evaluation. As Mrs. Holloway slunk away in defeat, Evelyn embraced Darius tightly, whispering, "Your father would be so proud." Later, facing the interview with unwavering resolve at the imposing stone Harvard Club, Darius clutched his father's journal, a legacy of defiant hope. Despite a doctored photo intended to falsely accuse him of cheating, Darius spoke from his heart about overcoming adversity, injustice, and a hostile system. His impassioned words revealed not only his own strength, but the collective strength of those determined to break through racial and economic barriers. In that defining moment, Darius Knight transformed humiliation into a resounding triumph that silenced his enemies and ignited hope for generations to come. Darius Knight stood proudly on the auditorium stage, his voice steady and resolute as he delivered his graduation speech about community and opportunity. His words echoed the legacy of his late father, William Carter, whose brilliant contributions, even though unrecognized by traditional institutions, had paved the way for his own journey. Today, success wasn't measured by the name on an acceptance letter, but by the integrity, kindness, and determination one brought to every challenge. In the front row, Evelyn Carter, now newly employed in community outreach with a long overdue promotion and tearful pride, wiped away tears as she watched her son transform adversity into triumph. As the ceremony ended, the room buzzed with gratitude and hope. Even as former bullies like Marcus's family receded into disgrace and Mrs. Holloway's career ended in bitter reckoning, Darius had proven his doubters wrong. His father's journal and his mother's lucky stone had become symbols of a legacy built not on privilege, but on overcoming obstacles. Later that September, as Darius stepped through Harvard Yard, its ancient stone gates welcoming a new kind of scholar, he recalled his father's words. "The dream is never about the destination. It's about proving you belong there all along."